Hey everyone, welcome. Today we are so excited to be joined by Donovan Eberling, who has an amazing story of how he was able to scale his portfolio from 0 to 26 units in a pretty short time. And he did this all through a combination of in and out of state investing. And we're just so excited to have you here. How are you doing, Donovan?
I'm good. I laugh at that every time I hear that number because I always cringe in the back of my head because 10 of those units are in one apartment complex that was probably one of my lowest entry investments and still one of my most problematic. So it's like don't always use the number of units as the quality bar by whether or not you're
Yeah.
succeeding in real estate.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely talked about some of your successes and failures, but I think it's more about learning from those and applying that to the future. And I'm kind of excited just to dive in, hear about your story. And I always love kind of starting things off. We have new investors, experienced investors, but I love kind of understanding kind of how you got interested in real estate. What kind of stood out to you? And was there anything that you wanted to share?
Yeah, so I never read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, but he did come out with a game called Cash Flow. And my wife and I love board games. This is a board game reference, sure, in and of itself. And so we got into this game, Cash Flow, and we had another couple that we were playing it with, and it really helped to solidify that idea of passive income and how important that can be to life goals. And then I had some other friends that had gone through some like very expensive courses on how to succeed in real estate, and it sounded a little like a Ponzi scheme, honestly, but there were some interesting things that they pulled out of that. And one of those was, hey, like if you look at the number of people who are millionaires in the US, 95% of them have made the majority of their fortune through real estate. And I thought that was such a big number at the time that I'm like, okay, well, I would like to be financially independent one day, so I'm not going to ignore real estate if the numbers speak that highly for it. Like there's something there that is not in the stock market, and up to that point, my only investing was the stock market.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, even at an early age for me, I graduated college about 6 months ago. And even from an early age, I kind of read that same fact. Like, why would I not get into real estate if there's so many millionaires in it? And I've always wanted to live my life kind of by design and really live my life off of the passive income my properties will produce. So that's awesome. And yeah, there's definitely so many I guess, advantages to real estate, not even just cash flow, but also for taxes and other great information. But I kind of wanted to dive in right into your story. So you're kind of a new investor. How did you get that first property? Where did you find it? Kind of just tell us a little bit more about your process.
Yeah, so I'm a new investor and an old investor at the same time. I started back in 2009, and that was when I made my first investment. It was right after the market had crashed, within 6 months, a year of that time frame. And even then, the California market was where I lived was way too expensive, and so I was like, well, where else do I know the market well enough to be confident? And at one time, I had lived in Las Vegas, and so I felt like I knew where some of the good areas were around there. It was only a 4-hour drive from LA. So I and my wife co-invested. She wasn't even my wife at the time, but we still co-invested together in a investment property. We drew up a contract between us about what would happen if we were ever to separate, and we ended up buying a 3-bedroom, 2-bath in the southern side of Las Vegas, and we bought it at a price that at the time I deemed there's no way someone could build this house cheaper than I am buying it. So that was what gave me the confidence to move forward at that time, right? Is just that rock bottom pricing and that helped a lot, right? Just to know if you can't if you can get in it on a deal where you just can't justify that anyone's ever going to be able to replace it for less, that's got to be a good deal.
Yeah, no, exactly. And how long kind of in that beginning stage did you spend on analyzing deals and really feeling comfortable? I know you said you were comfortable with the market, but how did you get more comfortable with kind of the whole investing as itself?
I didn't have any mentors at the time, and I was very unsophisticated. And from the perspective I stand on now on my big high horse, The way that I approached it, we were doing an all cash offer. I had no intention of leveraging it at all. It was, we're just going to put in this money, and then every month we'll get a rent check back minus expenses, right? So that was kind of that was the calculation there, and that worked. I mean, it was great. We were getting a check every month, and that money was doing something for us so that we could tangibly feel and see happening. And we started with a property manager there. And at some point, we fired the property manager because we just felt like they weren't doing anything useful for us, weren't giving us regular updates, weren't. And I mean, we had perfect tenants at the time, and they still couldn't pay us on time. So then we self managed. Um, but sorry, relating back to your original question, did I answer it?
Yeah. No, it's perfect.
So, so just kind of jumping from that to like my next experience was when we bought ourselves a condo in Los Angeles, and we put about $100,000 down and had about $400,000 in debt on it. And this was my first time taking a place on debt. And I was scared of this because my parents had always like made me feel like debt is not something you want to get into. You don't want credit card debt, as little debt as you can possibly carry. Sure, you might need some on a house, but be really careful about it. Don't take off more than you can chew. And it felt like a lot at the time. And I will say that, if market conditions at that very early time in my life had gone south like they had in the big crash, like I might be singing a different story. But I bought at a time that felt good. It felt like the market was on the upswing. It turned out that it was. And a couple of years later, we were standing on like $240,000 in equity in this place, like beyond what we had originally put in. And at that time, I was also hating life in Los Angeles and wanting to try something new. So I'm looking at this and saying, I'm right now equity rich but cash poor. I'm able to make my monthly mortgage payment, but it's real tight, and I feel like we're losing a little money every month. I'd like to try and figure out a life somewhere where this isn't feeling so hand to mouth. And so what we did was we sold the place and moved up to Seattle, and cashed in all that equity on it. We had bought for I think we bought for a little under 500, and then we sold for 720 when we
What
sold the
type of
place.
property was that?
This was a condo in the Los Angeles area, getting a little bit down near the beach in Playa del Rey, but still about a mile off.
Cool. And now, after these kind of two first properties, one in Vegas now, and then the condo in LA, was there any big aha moments? I know you're talking about the equity, and I'm sure that was a big upper for you, but anything else that you wanted to share?
Yeah, so we had put in cash like $140,000 in this initial investment in Las Vegas, and then put less than that into this condo in Los Angeles. And the appreciation rates weren't quite equal. Los Angeles was having a little bit better appreciation at the time, but looking at just the growth on cash return there was like blowing my mind, right? That we had put down this much smaller amount of money, and then we were able to leverage $400,000 that was that $400,000 was growing as if the money was ours, right? Like
Yeah,
the bank at the end of the day, when you pay off that loan, doesn't say, wait, we get a piece of the equity, right? Because we were holding that other 400. It's like it's all yours, right? The risk is yours, but
yeah,
so is the reward. And like that was the first inkling of aha with what leverage can do for you. And whereas there was a very linear path for our cash home in Las Vegas.
cool. Yeah, I mean, leveraging that debt and really kind of taking advantage of it. It's so cool how like you could get into these properties for pretty much, I mean, pretty little money compared to what the property is actually worth, and you get all the reward for it. I love how you brought that up. And now, so after your second property, where are you looking now? Are you looking to stay around? Are you looking to expand into other markets? What's kind of your game plan at that time?
Like once we got up to Seattle, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I tried my hand at doing a flip. The first one did not go particularly well. I felt like I did have a mentor in this case, and I felt like I was woefully under mentored in terms of not getting a very good assessment of what it was going to cost. And so I ended up getting into a property that I think, did not work out well. I mean, it was break even, so you could just say I paid for an education at the end of the day. Um, so I didn't really love that situation. So we ended up selling our Las Vegas investment, putting it all into this flip, and then holding it until we could sell it for a little bit of profit as the market went up. Which was an okay solution, but again, this was like forgetting my earlier lesson about leverage, and like that I held on to that so tight because I was so mad about the idea of losing money on it. Um, so we we ended up finally, after about a year of holding on to it, selling that place off, and so suddenly we were renting ourselves at the time. We no longer owned any property, but we had a very large amount of, from my perspective, capital to work with. And I was like, well, do I go back to the stock market? Do I keep trying an investment? And that was when I went to my first meeting with Jennifer. And she talked about the Burr method, and she talked about, looking at out of state as options, and a lot of these types of things that were very much like, oh, this is how somebody should be doing it.
Yeah.
And so, the first thing that stuck out to me is, okay, start with your own house, right? Start with a house hack. Start with getting somebody to pay part of your own mortgage in the place that you want to live, and reducing the amount you're paying in rent if you're doing it as, in an ideal world. And so we did the house hack. It worked out well. Shortly after that, I teamed up with my brother and did my first out of state investment in Dayton, Ohio. And that one is the one that was a little bit problematic for me, that, 2 years later, we're still kind of like, are things going any better yet? Like we had a lot of issues to work through to get that one up. But I mean, it was a 10-unit apartment complex that was, over 5,000 in revenue, and we got it for 340,000. That seems like it should work out one day. Like on paper, I'm still convinced when I stare at this that, yeah, tomorrow it's going to work out. It's not working out yet today. A lot more maintenance and capex than we expected, but maybe tomorrow will be the day where this one finally starts to work.
How did
Like, I
you
don't want
kind
to
of,
sell it.
yeah, yeah. How did you kind of pinpoint on the Dayton, Ohio area?
My brother had been involved in, I'm forgetting the word for them, but like passive participation type type investments, and so he had done that for a couple of years, and had a good experience with it. And he had taken one of their prospectus and said, "Hey, maybe we cut out the middleman and we just do one of these ourselves. Here's the report on the market and why we should be thinking about investing there." And I found it pretty compelling. I think that the more time I've had to look at it, I could point out the mistakes in some of their thinking and some of ours at the time. But I mean, I still think that it was a solid enough thesis that I don't expect it to be a worthless investment at any point.
Awesome. So now, after you've gotten into that Ohio, and you have your condo and your property in Vegas, what's your next step? How are you able to kind of identify which areas you want to go into next? Are you looking to stay in state and kind of learn from those successes there, or keep adventuring out of state into these new markets?
Yeah, I kind of dove into both. Right before the pandemic, well, right as the pandemic was starting, I had a nerve-wracking purchase of my 8-unit apartment complex in Clarksville, and that was really based solely on the confidence that I had seen from all of the other investors that had already entered that market, and saying, okay, like there's a lot there. I'd been to Nashville. I'd never even set foot in Clarksville. But I was just seeing like such confidence and strength from the investors that were there, that I'm like, okay. And then I met Kelly Kellett and saw how amazing her and her team are. And I was like, okay, like I get it. This is the Lamborghini of property managers. And you are feeling so well taken care of with someone like that. And it's night and day to the experience I'm having with our property manager in Dayton, Ohio. So that
Awesome.
happened. And then I also started into doing a bit more local investing in the state of Washington as I gotten to feel a lot more confident there. After my first foray didn't go so well, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to try this again. And my next investment turned out to be fantastic. The place that I found was a grandfathered in waterfront triplex, so a home on the water and then a duplex up the hill from it. And the person who was selling it, this was in kind of a lull in the market, right in the middle after the August after the pandemic had started, and and so I just watched this guy drop the price $25,000 a week until it was down $100,000 less, and then I just jumped on. I can't skip this deal. And so got in there, and I knew I was already going to be getting a little bit of equity on it. I bought it at 535 with an ARV around 560. But after some really modest renovations and getting the property split, the main home and plus the appreciation that's happened in the market in the last year, the main home, the 3-2, is now worth 760,000, not including the duplex up the hill. So that was just an incredible find, and like definitely the best deal that I've done since the history of deals.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And really kind of diving in and understanding that, wow, it's grandfathered in. That's extreme right there. So good job for you. Kudos to you. And now kind of that we've talked mostly about kind of your portfolio. I know you have a couple other stories, but I really want to know, and I think it'd be really helpful for some of our investors, if you could kind of walk us through and show us and kind of tell us about what fears did you have kind of investing? How did you overcome them? And what advice would you give to a new investor?
Well, I think that if you've ever tried investing in the stock market, you get a taste for volatility, or you don't, and you stop investing. And so I find that my personal profile has like a moderately aggressive approach, right? Like I don't spend a whole lot of time second guessing myself. Like it's good to analyze and kind of do a retrospective on things that you consider a mistake and figure out what went wrong. But I think there's so much that can also be lost through inaction. So for me, I've never had a really hard struggle with being nervous about investing. Like if you want your money to grow, you got to put it somewhere, right? Like you're not going to bury it under a rock. You got to do something with it. And watching it grow in a interest bearing savings account does not make anybody happy. So I think the returns on real estate have just always been so compelling, even compared to like when you look at the returns you get on, say, like the S&P 500 or something like that. Like they're really mind blowing returns when you start to see all of that that appreciation and leverage working in your favor, and the much lower risk profile there is between the leverage of that versus stock.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I love kind of what you said about you weren't scared to kind of get out there and take action. I know that there are a lot of people kind of with that analysis paralysis, really just kind of stuck and not knowing where to go. But I'm glad that kind of meeting Jennifer and having kind of that light bulb moment is like, oh, this is what I should be doing. And kind of in our community and seeing that Clarksville is a really popular area, working with our teams there, really was able to help you kind of just grow as an investor and just keep learning. So now I know we're going to wrap up a little bit here. I'd love to know, like, what is your way? Why do you choose to invest in real estate and kind of live your life through passive income?
Yeah, it's kind of funny that my reasons kind of drew me back into not being a full-time real estate investor. So I kind of set out with this goal of, okay, I'm going to be a full-time real estate investor and work to get enough passive income to where I feel like we're good, right? Like I can do whatever I want at this point and write my own ticket. And I figured from where I was when I kind of jumped off and said, this is what I'm doing, like last year in September. I was like, and at that time, I'm going to start publishing board games under my own name and doing my own board game thing. And then along came like my perfect job, which is basically I now get to produce and design board games for like major IPs, movies and TV shows and things like that. And so it was basically everything I wanted 5 years, 10 years down the line, getting to eat it right now and getting to work on products and games that I never would have been able to touch without like 15, 20 years invested in building relationships with those major companies. So
That's
that's
awesome.
what took me out of being a full-time real estate investor.
Hey, and that's all right. And that's what's so cool is that everyone has different goals and aspirations for what they want real estate to be able for them to do. And you're really living your life by design. What That's what we love about real estate is that whatever you want to do is that you can do it through the passive income. So that's awesome. And just kind of to wrap things up, I know you're working on some stuff right now, maybe in Seattle and Florida. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Uh, I don't have a lot to say. I just found out I did not make. I missed out on my bid last night for a duplex. I missed out last week. I missed on my bid for a an eightplex in Tampa, St. Petersburg area. That's one of the markets I'm looking at next as being pretty strong for me. It fits that right, like dovetailing between good appreciation plus good current cash flow.
Yeah,
So I want to see a little of both. I don't like to be one side or the other.
that's
And
yeah.
one thing I would definitely like to say is I could not have done this without my wife being so supportive. We are a team, and everything that I do, I'm running by her and saying, are we still in sync on this? Because man, you do not want to be taking large amounts of cash and putting it where your spouse doesn't want to see it go. That is a recipe for disaster. So I'm really
Oh
grateful to
yeah.
have her. I mean, she's actually now taken over a flip that we were working on. Well, it's going to turn into a burr actually, but she's taken that over up in Everett and is just knocking it out of the park, man. Like the place is looking gorgeous. She's got a much better eye for fashion design type stuff. I'm very like, cool. Does it have chrome in it? Good. That looks new and shiny.
I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that as well. But that's awesome that you and your wife are kind of like that tag team duo and you're able to rely on each other and really just work things through. I think that's what's so important about kind of being an investor is really having that team there ready to help you. And that's what we love in the inner circle is just being able to be in a community full of like-minded investors, really just all on the same path. So we're all going to be able to share our successes and failures. And I just want to say thank you so much for kind of joining me on this call today. Was there anything last you wanted to mention?
No, I think that's it. Other than, I think that a lot of time, one of the things I'd mentioned before was just when it comes to like new investors, right? Because I don't think everyone's going to start from the same place, which is, it's not fair, but it's the way it is. And so, I often think about like when I was, a poor kid just out of college and like what would I be doing if I hadn't won a game show to get my initial investment capital in place, right? And to me, I think that I'm doing it now. Actually, I ran out of capital. I spent it all. It's all in projects. And I said, where can I get more? And I ended up taking the 10 years of retirement 401k that I had set aside and taking a large amount of that and pulling it out and into real estate because like the 401k was not making like I'm looking at the returns I'm getting with my own money. I'm looking at the returns that I'm getting through my my managed 401k and I'm like these aren't even comparable. Like I really just want to take control of this and put it into investments that are going to benefit me more in the long run. That's going to be better for my retirement. And that's a big step for somebody to make. But I would say like if you are somebody looking and saying, man, I don't have any sources of capital, but you've been working for 20 years, then, maybe that's not the case. And you've just never really thought of that because everyone thinks of it as like the sacred cow. And I'm not saying everyone should run out and do it, but, think about an acceptable level of risk and consider it.
Yeah, and you brought up another great point. That's what I love is that there's so many ways to get into a property and there's so many ways to exit a property. There's just so many different things that you can do to become creative, and especially if you don't have money or have little to money to work with, there's always people out there that will lend you or that you can find to help you kind of get into that first property. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. I see that Juan in the chat said, way to go, Donovan. You're killing it. So thank you so much. I hope everyone enjoyed hearing Donovan's story. And if you guys do have any other questions for Donovan, you can feel free to put them in the chat. And I'm sure he'll be able to get to them. Thank you, Donovan.
All right. Looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.